Yay! Our straps are attached to the back of our backpack. I'm just going to line up these seams here. Just kind of do a real eye check. Yeah, they look pretty good. Acceptable to me. Now, if you have a smaller child that's going to wear this, you can always shorten the straps. If you have a larger person that's going to wear it, you can always lengthen the straps. So make sure you take that into consideration before you attach them. All right, now that, in my opinion, the most frustrating part, attaching the straps, is done. Woohoo! Let's attach the back of the backpack to the front of our backpack, which we have put to the side. So now we get to put both parts together. So we're going to deal with the outsides of both. So we want the right side of our front panel facing the right side of our back panel. So here's my correct side of my backpack. This is what people will look at. And what I need to do with the back panel is flip it so that the straps are on the inside. Something like that. So I have wrong side and wrong side are on the out. And then what we need to do is pin these two pieces together. And the place to start at is your seams where the light green and the dark green come together. So I'm going to take my back panel, light and dark green seam, and I'm going to attach it to where we have the side panel here, light and dark green. And I need to make sure that those two seams line up as best as possible and that my edges are lined up. And then I'm going to pin it in place. And for me, I like to pin both the light green and the dark green sides just to keep them where they need to be. Now, go over to the other side. You need to do the same thing over here. Line up the dark and the light green seam, and then line up the edge. And then pin them in place. Going through a lot of fabric here. Sometimes the pins will make it difficult. All right, so now when I sew these together, I know that at least my seams will line up. So in order to make the backpack symmetrical, we've got the two sides done. Let's pin the top and the bottom together. So I'm going to go down to the dark green. I'm going to pull my side panel out here and just kind of eyeball where the center is. I'm just going to grab my dark green panel here, find where I think the center is, line up the edges, and pin in place. So we've got two sides and the bottom. Let's do the top. Make sure my straps are tucked in there. All right, I'm taking my light green, finding kind of where the center is. Taking the back side of my backpack and the light green, approximate where the center is. And I'm going to pin that in place. Now you just take it area by area. So do this top quadrant area. Do this top quadrant area. So everything's pretty symmetrical. So I would take this two and divide it in half. Line up the edges. Pin it in place. Take this area. Find the center. Line up the edges. Pin it in place. Go to this area. Find the centers. and pin it in place. So by the time I'm done, everything is pretty symmetrical, and I have my back panel pinned to my side panel, which is attached to the front. All right, so now we have the back panel that has the straps attached to it, pinned in place to the front panel. So let's head to the sewing machine where we will sew around where we pinned, and then our backpack is almost done. All right, so here is what we just pinned. Now, just as a reminder, if you had sewed your front light and dark green panels together and you didn't leave that open, when you sew your back panel on, you need to leave some area, usually down at the bottom, open so that you can pull everything through. But for this backpack, I'm leaving the front open, and it's just pinned for right now, so I can just pull it right through. So in our case, I'm just going to sew all the way around without leaving a spot to pull the backpack through. All right, so I have a straight stretch stitch. My length is at 2. I have my dark green thread in, and I'm going to move my needle all the way to my left. I'm going to start right below where the seams meet, so that way I know when I end, I get a nice straight finished line right over that nice big fat seam. So I'm going to put it in here. I'm going to make this a 5/8 seam. So I'm going to have it come out from my foot just a little bit. And I'm going to sew all the way around and pull out pins as we go. Okay, now as you get to the seam, make sure your needle is in the fabric. Lift up your foot and take your pins out, and just make sure that your fabric is laying flat on the top and the bottom before you go over this big, thick, heavy area. And what I'm doing is when I am grabbing in there with my fingers, first of all, I'm making sure that the straps aren't floating over here and that you're not accidentally sewing your straps down. That would not be fun. And I'm just making sure that things are nice and flat and that there's no bumps in there to the best of my ability. All right, we sewed all the way around the edge. So I've sewn around, attaching the back panel that has its straps to the front panel that has the sides. Now, before you do anything, take off the tape. Everything is put together. So you can now take off the tape that I used to represent the wrong side of the fabric. All right, so flip it over to the front side and we need to take these pins out. So just kind of reach your fingers in somehow and pull those out. The reason why we put those in is so while we were sewing our bag together, the front opening wouldn't open. Usually the first pin, that's the most difficult. All right, there goes number one. Now you can get your fingers in there. Okay, here's the moment of truth. So you take that opening and you flip your backpack inside out. Hey, hey, hey. There we go. Our finished backpack. And somewhat functional because it does open in the front. Now the next and final step is to, if you want to, you can leave the front open. No problem. Still looks great. Does its job as Fiona's backpack. But I'm going to add a button to the front panel here. You could also add Velcro. It's up to you. So the next and final step is to add that button to the front of your backpack. The last thing we need to do for our backpack is to add the green button. So, how I did that was I laid out my front and I measured from this side seam to this side seam. And for my backpack, it's 12.5 inches. So half of 12.5 is 6 inches and 1/4. So I measure from this seam to 6 inches and 1/4, and I mark the center. Now I'm not going to use my pen here, my pencil here, because this is the outside and I want it to be nice and clean with no marks on it. So I just took a piece of tape and I marked an arrow on it. So I'm going to find 6 inches and 1/4 and put a piece of tape where my arrow is marked, showing the center of my backpack here. Now, where that center is, I need to measure from the top seam here, or this first seam, to this second seam. And I happen to have 1.5 inches. So half of 1.5 is 3/4 of an inch. So I know that when I line it up with my arrow to find the center, and I go down 3/4 of an inch, that's where I'm actually going to mark my line as best as I can. Now the reason why I'm marking it is because when I do use the sewing machine to make the buttonhole, you won't see this initial mark. All right, now I'm going to flip it around. Now I know that my button that I'm going to use is approximately 1 inch across. So from my center point here, I'm going to half that. So I'm going to have 1/2 inch on one side and 1/2 inch on another. I'm going to use my pen here to mark it as best as I can. I don't have much success marking fleece, but you kind of have to do it here. All right, I'm going to take off my tape. So that very hint of a white line is where my buttonhole is going to go. So I'll bring the sewing machine out and I'll put on my buttonhole attachment and we'll put that buttonhole in there. So as you can see, I did a test run several times to make sure I knew what I was doing. I also did the test run on applying button, which I'll show you how to do too. Remember, when you do the buttonhole, it's kind of a one-shot thing. So doing several tests to make sure you know the right procedure is a good thing to do. So I think I've done enough. So let's actually do the buttonhole on the backpack. Now, once again, I'm double checking my book to make sure that I have everything correct on my machine. My length is on the buttonhole setting. My width is out of 6. My needle position's in the center. I have the buttonhole setting as far as the stitch. So, here we go. Can I take this off? Take that off. I can get my backpack on underneath. Slide underneath. So, first thing I'm going to do is line up. Remember, we marked a line about 1 inch because my button is about 1 inch. So I'm going to line up where that mark is on the lines of my foot, although it's somewhat hard to see. But I'll make it happen. All right, that looks about right. Okay, make sure everything looks straight, lined up. I'm going to drop my foot down so it doesn't move it. All right, so I have my light green thread in so it will match the light green of the backpack. I'm going to hold just gently the thread that's coming from the needle down. I'm going to put my needle in the thread or in the fabric. I'm going to drop down. I don't know what that's called, the button for the buttonhole. And then in my book it tells me to push back, which I am. All right, I'm checking my book again, just making sure I got everything where it needs to be. And I think we're okay. All right, so I'm going to just very gently press on my foot to get the machine to work. You don't want to go too fast. And here we go. With any luck, it will work. it worked. Bring that back up. So what we created was the buttonhole that the button will go through. Now, you're not done just yet. You have to open up this area. So what I do is I take a pin and I block with the pin right where, let me show you, right where this longer stitch is on both sides. And I'll show you why. I'm going to go in just a little bit to block that longer stitch on the end. Then I'm going to take my seam ripper. I'm going to go in between on the inside of the pin, make a hole, and I'm going to cut that buttonhole open, and that pin is going to stop me so I don't go too far. And voila! So we just need to trim off these extra threads, and we have a nicely made buttonhole for our button. Alright, so there is our buttonhole that we just made. Now, in order to mark where the button goes, once you cut that open, try and do this so you can see it, stretch that fabric across, take your marking pencil or chalk, I bet you chalk would probably work really well on fleece, and just mark where the hole that you just created as well as you can. Just doesn't quite mark very well. Okay, so it doesn't have to be perfect, but at least I know where the button goes. So now that I've marked the button, let's sew it on. So you have to take your foot off that has your buttonhole, and you gotta take the button off because you're gonna need to attach that. I've switched out my thread to dark green, so when I sew onto the button, you won't notice it. I happen to have a button foot, so I'm going to put that on right now. Oh, first thing I need to do, and once again, you might need to get out your owner's manual, and I'll probably bring mine over here. I need to drop, what is this called? Let me grab my manual. I need to drop the feed control. I need to drop the feed here. So on the back of my machine, I have a button here that I press over and it drops it. So now that I've done that, I can put my button foot on. Alright, there we go. Okay, once again, looking at my book, I have to have my length at 0. So I just did that. And I'm going to set it to a zigzag. And then you're going to have to adjust the width according to where the holes are on your button. So let's try it out here. So I'm going to put my fabric in first. And you can probably, no, you have to do it this way. So I'm lining up the line that we marked on my fabric with right in between where these 2 feet are. That's where the 2 buttonholes will go. So I'm going to place my button right in between. So once again, I have my fabric down, I have the button foot on, and I put my button in between there with the 2 holes in between those 2 feet. Now you have to do a little trial and error here. When I did it before on my test run, I was at about a 4.5 as far as width. And every time you probably need to check it out and see how well. So I'm going to drop my foot so nothing moves. Alright, so And I'm manually using my needle. It just dropped down into this one hole of the button, which is great. I'm going to keep doing it manually. It's going to zigzag across, and it goes right into the second hole of the button. So my width happens to be lined up. For me, it's about a 4.5. So I'm going to press my foot down to get my sewing machine to work, and I'm probably going to go back and forth about 10 times. All right. Then once you have it go back and forth about 10 times, drop your needle in the fabric, go to a straight stitch. Oh, has to be out of the fabric, that's right. Go to a straight stitch, and then this will just kind of secure the thread with a straight stitch going up and down, I don't know, 3 or 4 times, just to kind of knot it in. And then for myself, I just do another zigzag, just in case. All right. And you pull that out. And once you trim off all that excess thread, you have a button that's been threaded and it's nice and tight. So, when you have everything all lined up, the button will go in the hole. All right. So now that we're at the end, I just want to show you a comparison of 2 backpacks that I did somewhat differently, so it might help you decide some of the options that you might want to do. The front is pretty much the same on both. The back is different as far as in this first backpack, I did not stuff the straps. In the second one here, I did. So this one has a layer of batting in it. These do not. So whichever preference you would like. Also, on this first backpack, I did not put a finished edge along the sides of the strap, and I did on the second backpack here. I personally kind of like it stuffed, and I really like the finished edge. It keeps everything in place, which is nice when whoever needs to wear it is actually has it on. So there's some differences. Now, something else you might want to consider is, what are you going to stuff inside your backpack? You can just go out and get some polyfill. For myself, I just went to Walmart and found a couple pillows, crafter pillows, and I got them in 2 different sizes to show you how it makes the backpack look. So on this first backpack, I'm going to put in a 16 by 16 pillow. Alright, so there's the first backpack with the 16 by 16. It's very square. I'm not sure if I like it because Finn and Fiona's backpacks tend to be more rectangular, but it's just something for you to look at. In the second backpack here, I have a 12 by 16, so it's more rectangular. So let me put that in to show you. Alright, so there's the 12 by 16. So 12 by 16 pillow, and this one closer to me is a 16 by 16. I think I prefer the 12 by 16, but you can choose whichever one you'd like. You could very easily maybe get 2 12 by 16s in here to puff it out a little bit more. It's completely up to you. But for my purposes and for my kids wearing it for Halloween, this will do for them. Thanks for watching.